So the purpose of this video is to walk through and give a more detailed explanation as to how we as a staff and a leadership team got to this point. We're going to try to answer some of the common questions that we've gotten and some of the things that we've had to work through as a staff and as a leadership team to present this plan to you. So that's our plan. I'll bring in some leadership team guys and we'll have this conversation together as we continue to pray through this. So this conversation for us and the plan that we are presenting to you has been about 2 years in the works, and it's really come starting for me back in February of 2020. This was before COVID, and we were really starting to grow. We had consistent Sundays where we were over 800, and Victor Holt, who was on the leadership team at that time, came to our meeting, and he said, I was at the back of our service this morning, and this was in the late service, and I watched a family come in and come out and leave because they could not find a seat. And we didn't know it, but we were violating a kind of a rule of thumb where if your sanctuary is at 80%, full, then you won't grow. And I've heard some, this is pre-COVID, I've heard some post-COVID say that number is even lower, maybe 70%. But we are violating that rule. And the rule is that you're just not going to grow. And so kind of one of the blessings that COVID did, if there was any, was that it kind of bought us time because we were totally unprepared at just how great of a challenge that we were facing in the need to create more space for people. So I think our first attempt to sort of solve this problem was that we looked at expanding our sanctuary into the bay, and we tried to add classrooms back in the bay. And I think right when we were kind of coming out of COVID, and we were there for Easter and even for an event that we had for Shonda Pierce, we actually added a couple hundred chairs back in the bay. We tore the wall down or moved it aside, and it worked okay in the short term, but overall, the people who sat there said the experience was not great. We found out later that we were kind of violating another rule of thumb, and I forget exactly, but basically, if you're on the same level, the same plane, once you get past 100 feet from the stage, your audience engagement goes down tremendously, which is why people go to risers or they slope the floor. But we were violating that rule. So we realized even though that was kind of a good short-term thing, it really wasn't a good solution for us in the long run. We even started to get some bids on adding a dozen or so classrooms in one of the empty bays. We figured if all the bathrooms are there, it wouldn't be probably a huge price tag, and we realized pretty quickly that this was not going to be a cheap addition. And it also just kind of forever segmented and just kind of quickly isolated the rest of our campus. You would have groups that would meet in the bay and up and down the halls, as well as on the other side of the campus. And so we started to become a little bit concerned about traffic flow. But I think the biggest factor was that it might help us with groups, but it really didn't do much to solve some of the other problems that we were working through. And so, once we started to work through COVID, our children's ministry kind of became one of the other concerns for us. We really started to grow a lot, and they outgrew that children's worship space, partly because they needed to spread out because of COVID, but partly because our children's ministry were just growing. And so they moved our late service. They had Kids City, and then they took over the youth area as well. And since they've done that, the children's ministry has continued to grow. We see regularly, even on non-big Sundays like Easter and Mother's Day, we have still seen over 80 kids back there. They've outgrown their children's worship space. So that was one concern. And the same is true, and the same is happening for youth. They have done really well with Sunday school and with their Sunday night activities, but really Wednesday night they are at capacity and they don't have much room to grow. That doesn't even consider D Now and some of the other events that they do. And so the youth even, they need a larger space. And for the size of our church, it's really great that they have a kitchen, but overall that space is pretty small for them. I thought at one point that the youth, and I think the conversations when I first came here, was that the youth, it might be a viable option for them to move into one of the barns. Maybe we could renovate that and they could move out there. And we started to work through that a little bit. And as we did, we realized that the floor in the barns are sloped for drainage, and the roof, although completely covered, there's an opening at the very top eave. And so just the sheer prospect of trying to flatten out the floor and to enclose the ceiling as well as the walls, and then gut it from all the animal barn stuff, but all the cement that's in there, the cost of doing that got to be really higher than what we ever expected, almost at the same level as doing new construction. And then we kind of dealt with the philosophy of, do we want the youth to be in a separate building? And I think if you ask the staff that answer, or that question, I think their answer would be probably not. We want to be a family for all generations, and there is something to say about us all being under the same roof, and we want to try to engage parents and involve them in their world. And so just having a separate building became a little bit less desirable, especially as we started to lean into some of the conversations about core values. So you've had the challenge of worship, you've got the challenge of children's, you've got the problem of youth, and then you have the challenge of groups. And right now, as you walk up and down our campus on Sunday mornings, you see that just about every single classroom is being used. And you also have some classes that are meeting out in some of the bays. And as you go through those individual classrooms, you're going to see that most of them are 70 to 80% full, which again basically means that those groups won't grow. Guests might come once or twice, but they're going to get the impression that that class is full, and they probably just won't come back. And so we've had to try to get unique with this and try to find other spaces, but we're not just missing rooms, we also need larger classrooms. I've joked that some of the largest classrooms that we have on our campus are used by senior adult groups, and I have no interest in trying to relocate those senior adult classes. I really like being the pastor here, but there is a legitimate need, not just for more classrooms, but also for larger classrooms. And so part of our effort in starting so many Sunday night and Wednesday night groups was, maybe a part of that was a different opportunity to kind of offer a different style. We've started some of these application groups, which are more discussion from Sunday morning, but I remember in the early stages, we didn't do that as a result of that. I mean, that was kind of maybe a minor draw for us, but the main reason why we did that was because we didn't have the room on Sunday morning to start any other Sunday morning small groups. And so almost out of necessity, we started adding on groups on Wednesday night and on Sunday night. And I think the Lord has really blessed that. But right now, we just don't have the space on Sunday morning to meet the needs of a growing church. And we even worked through, what if we did a change to our schedule? Is there a change that we can make to our Sunday morning schedule that would increase our capacity? And if you've been around Nettleton, this is the dreaded conversation of what we call duals, where basically you have worship and Sunday school at the same time. This is something that I believe, before my time here, the church tried and failed at big time, from what it sounds like. And there's a little bit of trauma associated with this. But the reality is as we started to even work through that and ask the question, okay, even if we wanted to do this, is this possible? We came across a pretty major barrier in the fact that our sanctuary is not soundproof. And so if there's anything happening in our worship space, in our sanctuary, you effectively lose half of your Sunday school space because the sound that's happening in the sanctuary just bleeds over into those classes. And we already knew that it was bad, but as we started to work through a plan, we really wanted to know with certainty if this was something that we could fix. And so we actually had a group that came out and ran some really detailed testing on the audio of our sanctuary and how that impacts the classrooms immediately surrounding that. And it more than confirmed our suspicions that basically their report back to us said this: unless you do a total redesign of the sanctuary, that doing groups and having worship at the same time was just not possible. And so a total redesign of our sanctuary would basically mean that you are building entire walls and ceilings around our current sanctuary space in order to enclose that sound. So you're either putting a wall and a sanctuary inside, or walls and ceilings inside the sanctuary of our current sanctuary, or you're putting walls and ceilings outside of our current sanctuary space. And either way, that's going to really be expensive, and it's really going to limit some of the other spaces on our campus. And at the end of the day, you're going to have to be out of your sanctuary for months while they do a renovation like that. And so it's going to be an extremely inconvenient venture to try to do that. So these were and are some of the challenges that we've been facing and some of the conversations that have been going on for 2 years. You've got the challenges of our worship sanctuary seating capacity. You've got the challenge of youth, the challenge of children's, and the challenge of groups. And what we realized pretty quickly, there are no easy, quick solutions. That brought us into a conversation with a company called Master's Plan. And the purpose of getting in touch with them was to help us dream of a master plan, a design plan for the future of our campus. This is a group out of Tulsa. The guy who founded this company is a former pastor. He has the heart of a pastor. They are kind of the go-to resource for churches in their building. And they made, over the course of 3 months, they made 4 or 5 campus visits. They would fly on in their little airplane. They had a team of people who'd come in. They spent long meetings with our staff. They would sit down. And I'll never forget, during their second visit, we're in the conference room and we're visiting with their whole team of people and their experts and all these things. And they're trying to figure out who we are and our DNA as well as our future needs. And at one point, Rodney, the master plan founder and head guy there, he kind of rolled his chair away from the table and he kind of scratched his head. And he was completely overwhelmed at the challenge of a space. I don't think he had ever seen a campus with barns before, a church campus with barns before. But I think that kind of opened our eyes to the fact that there is no easy, quick solution on this thing. And one of the things that they kind of added, we talked through those 4 challenges, they added in a 5th one for us that we were probably a little bit unaware of. And that was traffic flow. They were very concerned that when a youth and their family come to our campus on a Sunday morning, you basically have to either go through the office hallway or cut through the sanctuary in order to get back to the youth space. And so just kind of that lack of having a traffic flow for them, they were very concerned about that. And as we've kind of walked through that, we can definitely see and understand that. And so that became kind of a 5th priority for us, is how do we improve traffic flow and make it easy for new people on our campus to get where they need to go. So there are a lot of short-term efforts that we can take and a lot of short-term efforts that we are taking. I've already talked about how the children's are expanding into the youth area. The youth are launching a junior high service on Sunday night, separate from high school on Wednesday night. That will greatly increase their capacity. We're in the middle of an early service emphasis where we are trying to get people to make room in the late service by moving to the early service to try to make that a viable option and by offering childcare. And by all these efforts, I think what we have come to the conclusion of is we can do all of those things, and if we make those efforts and do them well, that we can consistently handle between 1,000 and 1,100 people on our campus with groups and Sunday school and worship on Sunday mornings. We can handle between 1,000 and 1,100 in our current setup. But once you get past that, I think we are going to see, as we saw in February of 2020, that if we don't address this, once we get to that capacity, what you're going to see is you're going to see families come in and leave. And realistically, you will have about 250 of that in preschool and kids. If you have 1,100 people here on a Sunday morning, you'll have 200 to 250 in kids in preschool. which would be super tight for them, but it also means you're effectively going to have about $850 in 2 services, and that is going to be really, really tight. We have already had, over the last year, we have had 2 Sundays where we were over 1,100. We're expecting on Founders Day this year to have over 1,100. We had over 1,100, I think we had 1,300 on Easter. And so people are willing to make those things in the short term and make those early service initiatives and all that. But we are really only, in a best case scenario, able to hold between 1,000 and 1,100, which means this: how long until we get there? And how much do we want to limit what God wants to do here? And I believe that the Lord wants us to grow. And I believe He brought us out here to reach people for the gospel, to be a place where families can come and get connected. And I believe that it is our job and responsibility to make it possible for people to come and to know Jesus, and to be a place where we can continue to reach people, which is why we're launching this campaign. When we started this conversation with Master's Plan, we gave them the goal of hosting 2,000 people on our campus. And we believe that this new design allows us to do that. And there is no doubt that there are a lot of questions and things that we still have to work through. My prayer and my hope through this is that we as a staff and a leadership team, and we as a church, we can just put this before the Lord, and we can just ask Him to guide us through a lot of these unknowns. What are we going to do as we wait for our 22 acres to sell? What are we going to do with our current debt? How and when should we do all this? How much should we do all this? We just want to put this before you as our church and before the Lord, and just ask Him, hey, can you just show us how we're supposed to go about this? We want to be people that take giant steps of faith. And as we've been on this journey, we believe the Lord wants us to grow. And if He doesn't, He will show us that. But we want to prepare and do everything that we can to make that possible. So we just invite you into this journey to pray with us. And these have been some of the conversations that we've had over the last 2 years. And we're just going to trust the Lord to guide us as we take this giant step of faith.